Hey guys, it's Mark, aka the Movie Buffer, back with another video. So today we're continuing our 2024 Spookathon with another Stephen King adaptation. This is, of course, Stephen King's The Night Flier, which came out in 1997. This was an adaptation of a 1988 short story, which was a part of King's collection titled Nightmares and Dreamscapes. And you know what's shocking? This one's actually pretty good. And when I say good, I actually mean it. I don't mean good in a maximum overdrive sort of way. I mean, this is legit a solid, well-crafted, and very entertaining story. Originally intended for a theatrical release, the film would end up premiering on HBO back in 1997. A real shame because I honestly think the production of this movie had big theatrical release material. Still, in spite of this, it manages to be a very twisted and entertaining tale, and extremely endearing with both its premise and its execution. Let's go ahead and dive in, or fly in, I should say. Ha ha ha. Anyway, sorry for those cheesy puns. You know I have to include one or two here and there, otherwise it wouldn't be a proper Movie Buffer episode. But, before you guys do so, please make sure to check out the Patreon. I'll post a link in the description below. It's a wonderful way to support the channel and allow me to bring more awesome content to you here on YouTube. And with that being said, let's get into it. Now, quick little disclaimer before I get into the video. You're probably not going to see a whole lot of reactions or jokes from me, like I usually cut to in the middle of my videos, due to the rather dark and serious nature of this movie. I feel me cracking jokes every 30 seconds would kind of just ruin the vibe. We open up at night. I know, shocker from a movie titled The Night Flier. Also, it was an excuse for me to make a SpongeBob reference. We open up in the middle of the night at a private airstrip where an unidentified plane has arrived. Despite trying to raise him several times, the night guard is unable to get a hold of the pilot, and the plane appears to be completely abandoned despite one of the taillights being on. As he approaches the plane, the guard finds some nasty looking blood smeared onto the side of the plane. Apparently this guy has never seen a horror movie before, since rather than go back inside his office and call the cops immediately, he decides to go poking around inside of the plane some more.
Good Lord. What happened in here? Help!
After getting smacked in the head with the door like 9 times, an unseen creature slashes him across the face, causing him to collapse to his feet. He picks up his flashlight on the ground and points it at the figure's face, which remains unseen to the audience. We do, however, catch a glimpse of a cloaked figure, sporting a collar that looks like it's straight out of Transylvania.
Oh, Jesus. Save me.
I don't think he can, boss. And just like that, he is devoured off screen as we get our title card. Now it's time to meet our definitely not hero of the movie, Richard Dees, a reporter played by Miguel Ferrer, an actor who is absolutely no stranger to playing complete assholes. Film buffs will definitely recognize him from the 1987 version of RoboCop, as well as another Stephen King adaptation, The Stand, which premiered in 1994. He also happened to be the real-life cousin of actor George Clooney, just a fun fact for you. Sadly, he would pass away in 2017 at the age of 61 due to cancer. Well, who knows, maybe this time he'll play a nicer character than he did in RoboCop.
Where's my picture? Where's my goddamn dead baby? I told you before, Libby, do not fuck with my stuff.
Well, if by nice you mean a despicable piece of shit, then absolutely. So Dees is a reporter at a publishing company that, needless to say, publishes some very questionable and rather controversial material. He goes to chew out his boss, who is currently conducting an interview with a new and upcoming reporter, Catherine Blair, who's about to be in for a rude awakening once she meets Dees.
Listen, Merton, just because you don't have any balls doesn't mean you can cut mine off.
Apparently, the press has already caught wind of the killing that took place at the airstrip the other night. What's more, is it appears this was not his first kill, as he's been doing this for quite a while, and has already created a name for himself, going by the guise of Dwight Renfield, which is a direct reference to Dracula. Renfield is of course that creepy dude who worshipped Dracula and ate bugs as well, while Dwight Fry was the actor who portrayed him in the original 1931 film with Bela Lugosi. While the make and model of his plane have already been identified as a Cessna Skymaster, the exact origins, as well as the identity and motives of the killer, remain a mystery, but it appears he at least wants others to believe he is a vampire, and perhaps might even believe this himself. Dees initially laughs and brushes off the case, suggesting that his editor give it to Blair instead. Next, we cut to this creepy-ass old lady sitting on the steps of her trailer home, admiring the Cessna Skymaster that is parked in front of her home. Seriously, this old hag might be the creepiest part of this entire film. She hears a noise off screen but does not go to investigate, appearing to be in some type of trance. But, in a pretty good jump scare I gotta say, it turns out to be her husband who is currently getting the shit mauled out of him. However, despite getting ripped apart right in front of her eyes by the Night Flier, the old woman takes her sweet ass time strolling indoors, and that creepy smile and glazed look in her eyes never leaves her face. Even after her husband literally gets his throat torn out. The Night Flier approaches, and as she turns to face him, she smiles directly into his face, revealing her neck to him. Her death takes place off screen, but you can pretty much guess what happens from here. It's a pretty eerie and creepy scene, which is very effective in showing us just a little bit of the carnage, while leaving the majority of it to the audience's imagination. I also like that we have yet to get a clear look at the Night Flier's face. Pretty soon, Dees sets off on a quest with his own plane to hopefully find and track down the Night Flier, whom he still believes at this point to be a man. His first witness is this mechanic named Ezra, who is basically the ultimate embodiment of every single Stephen King redneck stereotype character you could possibly imagine. Seriously, I don't care if it's a short story or a full-length novel, if you've ever read any of Stephen King's works, you've definitely come across a character like this. Apparently, the night before one of his co-workers was brutally murdered at the hands of the Night Flier, Ezra actually witnessed the man in the flesh himself. And in typical Stephen King fashion, he gives a very detailed and a very gratuitous description.
He was wearing a big cloak. He was. Red as a fire engine inside. Black as a woodchuck's asshole outside.
Apparently, old Ezra here came across his co-worker Claire, who appeared to be in some type of odd trance, similar to the old woman we saw earlier.
Saw you had a Night Flier last night.
Title drop.
Dwight Renfield flew in from Derry. Nice fella. Different. Said he'd stop back to say goodbye.
And stop back he did, it looks like, as we see the aftermath of good old Claire, having had his throat torn out and damn near decapitated by the son of a bitch. One strange thing Ezra makes note of is he found a pile of dirt along with some nasty looking worms and maggots crawling around in it, right next to Dwight's plane. He then proceeds to give Dees some cautious and foreboding words of wisdom.
You best be careful, Hoss. This fella who killed old Claire, he ain't no man.
Thanks for your input.
And Dees responds by, well, being a prick like usual. Next, Dees makes his way to a nearby cemetery to pay old Blair a visit. By the way, this is quite possibly the creepiest fucking cemetery I've seen in a long time. Further proving what a dipshit he is, Dees slices himself on the finger with his knife, and then defiles Blair's grave by putting his bloody handprint all over it, and then snapping a photo. However, it just so happens that the Night Flier happens to be soaring right above where he's located, and the two have some kind of weird psychic connection. Not really sure what's going on here, but it makes for a pretty good jump scare, admittedly. Especially when Dees turns around to find this Rob Zombie looking motherfucker staring him right in the face. Back at his hotel, Dee is typing up a report of his recent findings when he hears a thumping sound from up above. Dismissing it, he goes back to work only to hear the sound a second time. However, when he looks in front of him, he sees that the Night Flier has indeed paid him a visit. But, surprise, it was just a dream. Or was it? As Dees finds a message written personally to him in blood all over his hotel window. Meanwhile, back at the office, it looks like Catherine has taken an interest in Dees' story herself, as is discovered by her editor. But rather than chastise her or tell her to find a different story, he encourages her to take it up himself, making it into a sort of contest now between her and Dees. During his travels, Dees stops along the way on the highway to discover a gnarly car accident, with no survivors it looks like. Now, whether this is directly related to the Night Flier himself, or is just a completely random event, I'm not really sure, although it is insinuated that he may be partially responsible, but is never confirmed. However, we do get a rather disturbing revelation when Dees snaps a photo of one of the victims. Thankfully, one of the officers comes along and tells Dees to hit the road. Next, Dees goes to visit the home of the old folks who were murdered towards the beginning of the film. During all this, we get a voiceover narration from one of the officers, giving us several flashbacks to the initial discovery of the deaths. Dees also discovers a shattered mirror in the bedroom, but thinks nothing of it. Apparently, despite tearing the old man's head clean off, the Night Flier was a little bit more gentle with his wife, as the police discovered her body laying peacefully with her arms crossed with 2 large puncture marks on either side of her neck, further proving that the killer really wants people to believe he is indeed a vampire. This next scene is random and confusing as fuck, but I suppose it's supposed to represent Dees' gradual descent into madness. He encounters a dog on the roof of the mobile home, which growls at him and then eventually gives chase. I'm not sure if this was supposed to be a Cujo reference or what this was really supposed to mean, but Dees narrowly escapes the jaws of the nasty hound. However, after closing his door and looking back out his window, the dog has completely vanished. He looks back several feet and sees it sitting calmly on top of the roof. Well, that was interesting. Time to get shit-faced. So while he's drinking and looking over his photos, the bartender brings him down a drink that he says was from a gentleman at the end of the bar. I wonder who that could be. Now hot on his trail, Dees prepares to confront the Night Flier. But it turns out to be a fake out, as the Night Flier is already one step ahead of him.
Fuck you, Dwight! I'm not stopping! Fuck you!
And I gotta say, for being a bloodthirsty vampire, Dwight has been awfully patient with Dees so far. I mean, he's already given him at least 3 opportunities to live. Back at his motel, Dees has a run-in with Catherine, who just happens to be staying at the same motel as him. Initially, the two aren't too happy to see one another, but decide to put aside their differences in order to track down and hopefully stop the Night Flier. Of course, this is very short-lived as Dees disappears, only to reappear behind Catherine, attacking her and throwing her into the closet, and then proceeding to lock her inside. Having caught wind of his next victim, or should I say victims, as it looks like the Night Flier is heading straight towards an airport full of people, Dees sets off on a quest to hopefully confront the bastard once and for all. After trying to raise the airport several times with no success, all of a sudden Dees' intercom is filled with the terrified screams and shrieks of the victims. It goes quiet for a second, and then we finally get to hear Dwight speak.
Dwight.
Turn around while you still can, Richard. I don't want you here.
Once again, being extremely patient and fair with Dees and giving him several warnings when he could just rip his throat out right then and there. Of course, being the stubborn prick that he is, Dees refuses to give up the chase and lands on the nearest runway. He pokes around the inside of Dwight's plane, which is completely covered in blood, with blacked out curtains, and then comes across some old photographs. One of the photographs features a young man who appears to be a pilot standing next to a plane which matches the make and model of the Night Fliers. And sure enough, the back of the plane is filled with that nasty dirt that Ezra described, complete with maggots and worms. On top of it are several copies of Dees' paper, and the inside of the airport doesn't look much better, with what's left of the would-be passengers strewn about the entire place. It's a pretty eerie scene with some gnarly gore, rather like the aftermath of the club scene from Hellraiser 3 where we get to see all of the victims. Eventually, Dee stumbles across the same corpse he saw during the car accident sequence, including a crucifix stuffed into the dead man's mouth. I guess this is too much for old Richard, and he rushes to the bathroom to puke his guts out. However, it would appear he is not alone, as the old Night Flier can be seen behind him taking a bloody piss in one of the urinals. And at last, the two come face to face.
I've been watching you, Dees.
After establishing that the Night Flier is one creepy motherfucker, we get a nice little monologue between him and Dees. During all this, he caresses Dees with his nasty looking nails, and informs him that he admires him both for his tenacity and also his lack of remorse, being every bit of a monster as the Night Flier himself, but in his own way. He also takes this opportunity to remove all of the film that Dees has taken of him. I gotta say, this sequence is shot incredibly, much like the rest of this movie, and it blows my mind that this film did not get a theatrical release. Anyway, the Night Flier once again spares Dees, but gives him a strong word of warning before departing.
But listen closely, my inquisitive friend, because I say this only once. Do not follow me anymore, or I will swallow you whole.
Seems reasonable enough, but old Dick just isn't satisfied. So he chases after the Night Flier and demands to see his face. A decision he very shortly regrets.
I need to see your face! Show it to me, Dwight!
Can you spell dumbass?
Am I not all that you thought I would be?
Cue one of the sickest and most badass monster designs I've ever seen in a movie. And I also love the prosthetic they used for the vampire's mouth. It's honestly one of the most original and gnarliest looking designs I've seen in a long time. But rather than kill him outright, the Night Flier has a much worse punishment in store for Dees. After slicing his wrist with one of his nails, he eventually forces Dees to drink his unholy blood. And if you thought this movie was nuts so far, this third act takes it to a whole nother level. So Dees gets transported into some weird type of phantom zone, where everything all of a sudden turns black and white. It appears that he's back in the airport, but it's completely empty and the Night Flier is nowhere to be seen. When all of a sudden, the dead begin to rise. Or should I say, the undead. It's quite honestly a very creepy and disturbing sequence. And the lack of color really does drive in the sensation of desolation and madness that Dees is currently experiencing. For reasons I'm not quite sure of, they don't just swarm him and rip his throat out right away, but instead they surround him and taunt him. Dees makes a dash for the fire axe on the wall, and begins chopping away, swinging wildly at the feigned freaks. He manages to take out quite a few of them, when all of a sudden we switch back to color, and Dees finds two police officers pointing their guns at him, with none of the undead in sight. Catherine barges in just in time to see Dees holding a bloody axe while standing over several dismembered bodies. Yeah, not a very good look for you, Dees. Thinking that they're one of the undead taunting him, Dees charges the officers with the fire axe in hand and is immediately gunned down, finally putting an end to our not-so-friendly reporter. Should have taken Dwight's advice and backed out while you had the chance, Dees. We cut to outside, where we see the Night Flier walking through the dark back to his plane. During a flash of lightning, we briefly see his face transform from the bat-like vampire face into the face of the man we saw in the photograph earlier. Catherine catches a glimpse of the Night Flier as he strolls back into his Cessna, finally believing as the Night Flier ascends into the rainy night skies. We end with a freeze frame of Catherine's headline, identifying Dees as the supposed Night Flier killer. Well, hey, all he ever wanted was to make the front page. So that was Stephen King's The Night Flier. A pretty damn good adaptation if you ask me. Seriously, it is such a shame that this movie manages to fly underneath so many people's radars, no pun intended there. And with so many of his short story adaptations kinda sucking, it's actually kinda refreshing to see one so good. My only gripe with the film, and it's not even with the film itself really, is the DVD box art where they feature the Night Flier with his face completely revealed. Part of the mystery of the film was not getting a good clear look at the Night Flier's face, making the reveal at the end all the more worthwhile. While the short story is told from Dees' point of view, and it is kinda kept in the dark as to whether or not the Night Flier is indeed a supernatural vampire, or just a serial killer who thinks he's a vampire. In the film adaptation though, I think we can all agree it's pretty clear right from the get-go that this is definitely a vampire. The movie makes no effort whatsoever to hide this, and normally something like this could be seen as a flaw, but here it actually works to the film's advantage. The Night Flier himself is both badass and menacing as fuck at the same time, as are his killings, and this movie makes no efforts at all to skimp on the gore. Gorehounds will definitely not be left disappointed with this one. The character of Richard Dees is one of the most insufferable and despicable human beings I think I've ever had to follow throughout a film. But Miguel Ferrer plays him with such sincerity, it's honestly hard not to like the guy at least a little bit. And it does make his death at the end of the film that much more impactful. The Night Flier would make another appearance in a separate Stephen King short story titled Popsy, in which a kidnapper at a mall kidnaps a young child who turns out to be a vampire, i.e. the son of the Night Flier, who eventually tracks down and kills the kidnapper. Sounds quite familiar to that film Abigail that came out recently, and honestly makes me wonder if they possibly drew some inspiration from this one. The movie also has a great sense of atmosphere and mystery with the way the story unfolds. Reminded me a lot of an episode of The X-Files, only, you know, a lot more gory and violent. And the great thing about this movie is that you don't necessarily have to be a big Stephen King fan, or even a book reader to really enjoy it. If you enjoy horror at all, you'll for sure dig The Night Flier. I recommend checking this one out.
Well guys, thanks for watching. This has been Mark, aka the Movie Buffer. Ciao for now.